In American urban legends, there's this incredibly mysterious farm. Ever since a guy named Terry took ownership of it back in 1994, the property has switched hands twice, with each owner facing a ton of unbelievable incidents. These include all sorts of supernatural occurrences, UFO sightings, apparitions, and even werewolf-like creatures. Because stuff like this kept happening without end, it eventually drew in scientists to check things out. During their work, they uncovered even more baffling phenomena right on the site. For instance, they measured weird magnetic fields, unearthed bones from unknown animals, came across numerous cows with their legs severed, and even spotted entrances to bizarre alternate dimensions. Maybe, because so many odd events unfolded there, it later caught the attention of the Pentagon itself. A key point comes from Dr. Colm Kelleher, who was part of the investigation team. In the book Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, it's revealed that the Pentagon ultimately monitored them for over 2 years to gather 100 research documents, which they then classified as secret. When he aimed to publish a book sharing the non-classified discoveries, the Pentagon insisted on swapping out all the names in it to pseudonyms, except for his own. It wasn't just the names that got altered. Even before the book could hit the shelves, the Pentagon scrutinized it carefully for a full 14 months. It wasn't until May 11, 2021, that they finally gave the green light for the case file numbered 20SP0058 to be released. You have to understand, the Pentagon isn't your average organization. It oversees Area 51, a spot that's been the subject of rumors for decades, and serves as the headquarters for the Department of Defense. In other words, there must be something truly unusual going on here. Otherwise, the Pentagon wouldn't have gotten involved in the probe. That said, even though the book went through Pentagon edits, it still details a bunch of eerie tales that left me totally astonished. And even today, research teams are still actively exploring the place. If you've always figured the Bermuda Triangle and Area 51 were the ultimate mysterious spots, then today's video is bound to flip your perspective upside down. Today, let's dive into Skinwalker Ranch. Up in the northeastern part of Utah in the US, there's this cursed piece of land. Locals refer to it as Skinwalker Ranch. And more than 200 years ago, Native American Navajo people made their home there. Starting from the 15th century, generation after generation thrived on that soil. That changed in the 19th century when another indigenous group, the Ute, showed up, seized the Navajo's territory, and even kidnapped some to sell as slaves to Americans. So, after mutual bloodshed, the Navajo departed in sorrow. But before leaving, the Navajo shamans cast a curse on the area and called forth the Skinwalkers. Skinwalker translates to something like one who walks on all fours. It turns out that in Navajo culture, beyond the shamans who connect with spirits, there are dark shamans too. They can not only commune with spirits, but in times of need, they might even cast spells and drape themselves in animal hides. At that point, these dark shamans transform into gigantic versions of those animals, harnessing mystical powers from spirit beasts to wipe out their enemies, and that's what makes them skinwalkers. From then on, the Ute faced constant torment from these skinwalkers until they couldn't take it anymore. The Ute eventually decided to pack up and leave, restoring peace to the land. Over time, this terrifying history faded into just another urban legend. In 1933, a family called the Myers purchased the property, but they left it deserted for some unclear reason. That lasted until 1994, when a young married couple acquired it, and they soon figured out why the prior owners had avoided developing the spot. After all, the old tales weren't mere stories. They were genuine, horrifying nightmares come to life. Terry Sherman was a top-notch breeder of Angus cattle. In 1982, he tied the knot with his wife, Gwen Sherman. After the wedding, the pair welcomed a son named Ted Sherman and a daughter named Kate Sherman. By 1994, with their kids growing up and some savings tucked away from years of hard work, Terry chose to buy land and become a ranch owner himself. Pretty soon, they spotted a parcel in Utah spanning 500 acres, going for just half the usual market rate. Even though the couple noticed the land had been neglected for a while, They couldn't figure out why every door and window in the lone house, smack in the middle, was secured with huge padlocks. On top of that, these locks weren't just on the outside, they were bolted from the inside too. It felt like whatever was inside or outside the house had terrified the previous ranch owner. Giant iron chains encircled the entire ranch as well. Back then, his wife even joked that maybe the old owner had kept a massive hunting dog. The weird signs didn't stop at the ranch itself. Even in the purchase contract, the former owner stipulated that from that point forward, no matter who owned the land, digging on it was strictly forbidden. Despite all that, the couple happily signed on the dotted line for one simple reason. The ranch was an absolute steal. By then, they were enchanted by the dream of building a prosperous life there. So, why sweat the small stuff? And so, a few weeks after the purchase, the whole Sherman family moved in, buzzing with excitement. But right on that very first moving day, peculiar events started unfolding. In August 1994, Terry brought his whole family from New Mexico to settle at Skinwalker Ranch in Utah. Unlike any ordinary move, this day was bound to be packed with activity. Still, Terry and his wife Gwen couldn't have been more thrilled. At that moment, they were happily taking in the view of their new ranch. But just as the couple was lost in dreams of a bright future ahead, their son, Tad Sherman, suddenly piped up, asking what that thing was over there. When the parents followed where his finger pointed, they spotted an enormous creature. Could it be a wolf? Gwen wondered. Since Terry had experience raising livestock before, running into a wolf wasn't entirely out of the ordinary for him. Yet moments later, he realized this wasn't your typical wolf at all. It was weaving toward them in an S-shaped path. Once it got within about 150 feet, Terry could see just how massive it truly was. A fence stood behind the huge wolf, and by judging the gaps in the posts, Terry figured it had to be over 6 feet long, 3 times the size of a regular wolf. Under the afternoon sun, Terry even noticed its deep blue eyes. When it stared at you, it felt like it could peer right into your soul. By now, the giant wolf was right up close. It didn't seem aggressive at all, and it even wagged its tail as if pleased. However, just when the Sherman family started thinking it might actually be a friendly animal, the massive wolf lunged swiftly at the fence and in a flash sank its teeth into the head of one of their Angus calves nearby. Blood spurted everywhere from the calf's artery at that point. Gwen and the kids screamed in horror, while Terry instinctively dashed back to the truck, grabbed his pistol, and fired 3 shots straight at the huge wolf. Terry's aim was spot on, with all 3 bullets hitting their mark. Strangely though, the wolf not only held on tight, but didn't even bleed a drop. It was as if the shots hadn't touched it. Right as Terry was about to fire again, the giant wolf suddenly let go of its grip. The injured calf collapsed immediately. But now, Terry couldn't get close to check on the wound. That's because the massive wolf was heading straight toward him, and it moved with steady steps, clearly unharmed. Seeing the wolf closing in, Terry raced back to the truck once more and pulled out a more powerful rifle. As he squeezed the trigger, Terry could actually hear the bullet smack into the wolf's bones. Finally, the creature paused, turned around, and trotted off. Terry knew right then he couldn't let this giant wolf escape. After all, his family had to live here from now on. This thing wasn't just a threat to their safety, it had gone after their property too. Keep in mind, those calves were valuable. How could they end up as dinner for some oversized wolf? So, Terry grabbed his gun and chased after it on foot. But the wolf moved incredibly fast, vanishing into the woods behind the property in no time. Luckily, it had rained earlier that day, so the mud held clear prints from the wolf's paws, allowing Terry and his son to keep tracking it. Yet when they reached a spot about 70 feet from the creek, the tracks just stopped cold. This suggested that even if the wolf hadn't leaped clear over the water in one bound, it must have at least jumped in. That seemed nearly impossible. Remember, we're talking 70 feet here. What was even harder to believe was that, after crossing to the other side and going another 30 feet or so, any sign of its footprints vanished completely. On top of that, Terry later realized that despite hitting the wolf with several bullets, up to 7 in total, there wasn't a single trace of blood on the grass. And this was only their first night there. Back then, they had no idea that starting from that day, their real nightmare was just getting underway. After that terrifying initial experience, Terry drove into town early the next morning and told the local police about what happened the night before. But after hearing the story, the officers just shrugged and explained to Terry that aside from a security guard reporting a wolf sighting some 70 years ago, no one had seen any wolves around there in decades. Upon hearing that, Terry actually felt a bit relieved, figuring the giant wolf from yesterday was probably a lone stray animal that had gotten scared off and wouldn't return. Things didn't go as hoped, though. A few days later, while Gwen was heading back from town with groceries, she noticed something speeding up behind her in the rearview mirror. She pulled over to let what she thought was a vehicle pass. But as it drew even with her, Gwen realized it wasn't a car at all. It was the same massive wolf from their first day. Panicking, Gwen floored the accelerator to escape, only to find the wolf was astonishingly quick. Even as she hit 50 miles per hour, the creature kept pace right beside her. It wasn't until a fork in the road, where Gwen veered onto a smaller path to the right, that she finally shook it off. You can imagine how shaken up Gwen was from the ordeal. So once she caught her breath, she headed back to town and recounted the whole thing to the police. Throughout her emotional retelling, Gwen exclaimed, "Can you believe it?" That thing was going at least 50 miles an hour. When it ran parallel to me, it even had to bend down to look right at me. Yet despite Gwen's passionate description, the officers there couldn't buy into it. After all, she had no proof to back up the wolf's existence. With nothing solid to go on, Gwen had no choice but to head home, disappointed. Still, the Sherman family wasn't about to live in constant fear of this giant wolf. They resolved to pull themselves together and take it down. Little did they know, this might have been the worst choice they ever made. Following a string of attacks, Terry, as the family's mainstay, came up with a series of strategies. His top priority was keeping everyone safe. Next came setting traps to figure out how to capture or kill the wild beast. So Terry went into town and bought a bunch of supplies, including a post-hole digger for installing fences. He used it to dig extra pits and put up more barriers in front of the house. Time flew by, and before they knew it, the morning was already over. Terry figured he'd head back to the house for some lunch and a quick break. He'd left the post-hole digger right next to a big tree out front. But oddly enough, when he returned after eating, the tool had vanished completely. Right away, he started searching around the tree and even asked everyone in the family if they'd spotted it anywhere. No one had seen a thing. Strangely, a few days later, Terry noticed his digger perched up on a tree about 13 feet high, all the way on the far side of the lawn. It wasn't just the digger that went missing and showed up again. One time, Gwen headed to the supermarket and brought back a bunch of groceries. Once home, she sorted everything and stowed it in the fridge before going to rest in her room. But that evening, as she got ready to make dinner, she discovered the items were still sitting in their bags. Gwen was totally baffled, wondering to herself if she hadn't put them away after all. Feeling frustrated, she questioned each family member about it, convinced someone was playing a joke on her. That's when Terry finally opened up about what happened a few days earlier, with the digger disappearing and then turning up way up in that tall tree. Clearly, these bizarre incidents weren't the work of kids messing around. At that point, the couple finally grasped that something truly odd was going on. Late one evening, just as Terry was getting set for bed, he suddenly spotted beams of light coming from out on the ranch. He assumed someone had driven onto the property. Things like that happened from time to time. Sometimes it was groups of teens meeting up for dates, other times unauthorized hunters sneaking in for game. So Terry hurried outside and made his way toward the glow. The first thing he noticed was a weird metallic scent hanging in the air. Plus, even as he got closer to where the vehicle should be, he didn't hear any engine running and couldn't make out the shape of a car. All he saw were two incredibly bright headlights. and right when he was about to get a clear view of it, the lights started backing up repeatedly. Seeing them on the verge of crashing into the fence, Terry shouted out loud to stop. But the headlights kept retreating until, just before hitting the barrier, the car lights suddenly leaped upward into the sky. How on earth could a vehicle take off like that? Even weirder, starting from that night, the Sherman family kept spotting vehicle-like lights up in the air. Sometimes they looked like regular beams, other times in a V formation, and they even appeared as triangles once. To us today, that sounds an awful lot like UFOs. It wasn't only UFO sightings either. A few days after, the cattle on Terry's ranch began dying off in droves all of a sudden. What's notable is that these animals weren't ill at all. They'd been killed after having their organs inexplicably removed. Some had their eyes cut out, others their udders, and a few even lost their reproductive parts. The key detail was that when he examined these cows, not only were the wounds remarkably smooth, but there wasn't a single drop of blood anywhere at the scene. Without a doubt, with all these strange happenings piling up one after another, the Shermans were on the brink of breaking down. They began sharing their ordeals with the media, hoping that by spreading the word through news outlets, someone might be able to tell them what was really wrong with their land. Thanks to the media reports that followed, Skinwalker Ranch drew a ton of interest. Some folks believed the arrival of the Sherman family had disturbed the Skinwalkers, leading to this string of curses. Others figured they might have encountered extraterrestrials. There were even those who thought the Shermans were just making it all up. But no matter what the public opinion was, one thing stayed constant. The eerie events kept on happening. Because of that, every nightfall, Terry would drag out a folding chair, grab his rifle and his 3 hunting dogs, and station himself to watch over the ranch. At the slightest whisper of wind through the grass, he'd get anxious and go patrol the area. At last, on one particular night, Terry spotted those familiar car lights again, but this time they'd come to a halt right on the lawn. From a distance, he could make out 2 figures standing beside the glow. So he quietly shouldered his rifle and dashed toward them. Suddenly, a massive orange structure appeared in the sky, growing larger by the moment. The sight was so shocking that Terry paused to examine it closely. He even raised his rifle and aimed carefully at the orange formation. To his surprise, he noticed what looked like a patch of blue sky right in the center. This seemed bizarre since it was clearly nighttime. And just when Terry could hardly believe his eyes, he saw 2 flying saucers emerge from the structure and head toward the forest, along with the vehicle-like lights from earlier. It turned out the orange formation was some kind of portal between dimensions, connecting different places. But the question remained: why would an interdimensional gateway open up right there on Skinwalker Ranch? Of course, at that point, Terry wasn't thinking about any of that. He figured these damned aliens in front of him were the reason his Angus calves kept dying one after another. Overcome with rage, he grabbed his hunting dogs and gave chase. Yet right as he was about to enter the woods, an inexplicable fear made him hesitate. His dogs, however, charged straight into the forest ahead. Left with no choice, Terry eventually followed them in. The woods were filled with a strong, acrid burning smell. Terry called out anxiously for his dogs, but there was no response at all. Even the disc-shaped flying objects had vanished without a trace. In the end, he decided to head back home and wait for daylight to continue the search. Early the next morning, as soon as the sun rose, Terry grabbed his rifle and went deep into the forest. What he didn't expect to find was a pile of dog remains in the depths of the woods. Among the ashes, Terry spotted a familiar metal collar. At that moment, he finally realized the dangers at Skinwalker Ranch were beyond what ordinary folks like them could handle. So, after taking a few hours to calm down, Terry gathered the family together. They agreed it was time to sell the property. Since the ranch had already attracted a lot of attention before, when Terry put it up for sale, it quickly made headlines in the local papers. Even though plenty of people were curious and followed the story, no one dared to take over Skinwalker Ranch, except for Robert Bigelow, a billionaire entrepreneur with interests in real estate and aerospace. It turns out Robert had been fascinated by mysterious events and extraterrestrials since childhood. Even after his success, he invested heavily in founding the National Institute for Discovery Science, dedicated to investigating supernatural phenomena. He also brought on Colm Kelleher, the author of that book, as the deputy director of the institute. At the institute's opening ceremony, Colm explained that what they studied wasn't just aliens, but all sorts of anomalous occurrences. Many people lump the two together, but we don't see it that way. After setting up the institute, Colm looked into numerous bizarre incidents. Eventually, they noticed that so many mysterious events seemed to trace back to Skinwalker Ranch. That's why he convinced Robert to purchase the property and attempt to unravel its enigmas through scientific methods. But as it turned out, the situation at the ranch went far beyond the realm of conventional science. According to Dr. Colm, when billionaire Robert approached him with the invitation to lead the National Institute for Discovery Science, he hesitated a bit. Although he was deeply interested in strange happenings, he was, after all, a biochemist with a PhD from University College Dublin. How could he suddenly switch fields to study anomalous phenomena? The biggest concern was that through his years of investigations, he'd found many so-called mysteries were actually man-made hoaxes. If he got involved for real, it might just end up being a waste of time. That changed when a fellow scientist friend told him that if you want to catch a big fish, the best place is in waters no fishermen have reached yet. In other words, if you aim to verify the authenticity of paranormal events, head to areas not yet under government oversight. That's where you're most likely to uncover the truth. And so, he resolved to join the investigation. At the same time, he persuaded the former owner, Terry, to stay on as the ranch manager, making it easier for the research team to quickly get a handle on the property's conditions. Sure enough, it wasn't long before the investigators started running into weird stuff once they set foot on the ranch. Early on the morning of September 16, 1996, Dr. Colm Kelleher, who had stayed overnight in a trailer, documented his very first paranormal encounter. What he spotted was an incredibly bright light perched on a tree at the western edge of the property. It hovered and circled in the air for over 10 minutes, then suddenly dipped downward. Not long after that, it vanished right before his eyes, only to reappear again. Everyone who watched it back then agreed that its flight pattern didn't match any known modern technology. It wasn't just that UFO showing up in September, around 1:30 a.m. on November 13th, the team also observed a glowing yellow light zipping along at tremendous speed, yet it made absolutely no noise. After spinning a full 360 degrees like a blooming flower, it disappeared in an instant. Since most of these lights popped up and vanished so quickly, the researchers often couldn't snap a photo in time. But the cattle killings were a different story. On March 10, 1997, though some sources note a similar event on March 12th, Terry suddenly phoned Colm about it. It turned out that early that day, he'd discovered yet another bovine slaughter. Colm quickly rushed the team to the site, where they found a cow with all 4 of its limbs severed. Those cut-off legs were neatly stacked right beside the body. Colm was stunned and immediately examined the wounds, realizing that beyond the amputated limbs, every internal organ had been removed too. The crucial detail was that there wasn't a trace of blood anywhere at the scene. In his book, Colm even described it as if someone had shoved a vacuum cleaner inside the animal and sucked out every last drop. At that moment, the group just stared at each other, unsure what to do next. Still, much like a plot twist in a movie, the team's persistent efforts paid off on August 25, 1997, with an astonishing breakthrough. Using equipment, they detected an area of unusual magnetic disruption in the ranch's southwestern corner. Right away, they contacted their sponsor and arranged for the most advanced telescope available at the time to be shipped in. It had night vision capabilities, perfect for round-the-clock monitoring. But after days of constant watching, they came up empty-handed with no new sightings. That changed when Terry brought up something from 3 years earlier. Back when media reports mentioned a mysterious young man who visited Skinwalker Ranch and asked for permission to meditate there. Terry had figured it was harmless and agreed. Unexpectedly, right after the guy started meditating, a UFO appeared overhead. so Terry suggested the team give meditation a try themselves. What blew everyone's mind was that when they did, the person on watch duty spotted movement. At first, the observer noticed a golden glow in the sky, and he quickly called the others over. They watched as the light expanded, stretching out to about a yard long. That's when they realized it wasn't a UFO at all. It was a tunnel, floating in midair, and it even seemed to be powering up. Even more shocking, as they stared intently at the tunnel, they saw a dark-colored creature crawling out from inside it. In the end, it leaped down and vanished into the night. This incident stands out as the most unbelievable part of the entire book for me, especially since the book doesn't include any pictures of the black entity. But according to Colm, it's not that they withheld evidence. It's because all the proof ended up in the Pentagon's hands. Still, there's no need to worry, because exactly 5 years ago, the popular History Channel put together a fresh research team to explore Skinwalker Ranch, and this time, the Pentagon didn't meddle much. In 2016, another influential figure, Brandon Fugel, purchased the place from Robert. Back then, Brandon vowed to uncover every secret behind Skinwalker Ranch using solid scientific approaches. Unlike before, Brandon's investigation would unfold through documentary-style updates to keep everyone in the loop on the latest developments. And as the team dug deeper, they actually uncovered a mysterious rock carving. According to the scientists, this petroglyph was actually a depiction of the Draco constellation. What a coincidence. We've discussed before how lizard people are said to come from the Draco star system. Could it be that the creatures appearing at Skinwalker Ranch are actually those reptilians? It wasn't just the enigmatic artwork. The scientists kept witnessing UFOs there too. The most jaw-dropping part was when they used a drone to map the terrain and captured something unexplained hovering in the sky. This led some folks to wonder if it was the same orange structure that the Sherman family had seen years earlier. After all, there's been a long-standing idea that certain electronic devices, like cameras or recorders, can pick up things that the human eye simply misses. Of course, what we can't ignore is that there's no way to be absolutely sure if the footage from the History Channel is genuine. But thanks to the show's broadcast, more and more adventurers are heading to Skinwalker Ranch these days. As a result, an increasing number of people are snapping photos of UFOs, and some even claim they've recorded actual skinwalkers. Even if just one of those discoveries turns out to be legitimate, it could totally reshape our understanding of the world. The key point is that the Pentagon really did get involved in the investigation back then and actually seized and carted off documents. If there were no secrets at all on Skinwalker Ranch, why would the Pentagon bother doing that? I'm curious what you all think about it. Do you believe that other dimensions truly exist in our world and that there might be pathways connecting them? Do you figure Skinwalker Ranch could be a gateway linking different realms? Feel free to share your thoughts and discuss. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you'd like, go ahead and subscribe to catch the upcoming videos. Or if you've got more time, check out some of the other content on this channel.